Well, welcome everyone to PAVE's 5th live panel discussion. Today we have a very special edition for us. We recently put out a poll that talked about public perceptions, and there was a number of things in that, a number of data points in that poll that really reflected just how many misunderstandings and questions people have about autonomous vehicle technology, which is of course both complex and still emerging. And we thought we would try today to help answer some of those most common questions. And to do that, we brought two of the absolute titans of the field for maximum credibility in our answers to these questions today. So first off, I'd like to welcome Chris Urmson, the CEO of Aurora. Chris, welcome, and could you just say a few words just in case there's anybody in this audience who isn't familiar with you already?
Well, thanks, Ed. Thanks for having us here. Thanks to PAVE for organizing this. I've been fortunate to work in self-driving cars for, I don't know, the last 17 years or so. I had a chance to compete back in the day in the DARPA Grand Challenges, Urban Challenge, and then had the incredible opportunity to lead the Google self-driving car project for 7.5 years. And a few years ago, got together with Drew Bagnall and Sterling Anderson to found Aurora. And we're working on this mission to deliver the benefits of self-driving technology safely, quickly, and broadly. And it's exciting to have a chance to be here today because while I believe deeply in the promise of this technology, it's not going to have the impact in the world that we think it can without people understanding it, be able to relate to it. So it's a real, great privilege to have a chance today to talk with folks. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Also joining us today is Dr. Mark Rosekind. He is, well, the Chief Safety Innovation Officer at Zoox. And Mark, welcome to you as well. Thank you so much for making the time to be here. And if you could just share, again, just a few words about who you are and what your background is so people know.
Yeah, I'm actually on my 6th career, but I'll make it quick. I'm actually trained as a scientist doing sleep fatigue and human factors work in academics as a NASA scientist in my own company. And then appointed by President Obama to be one of the board members at the National Transportation Safety Board. And at the end of my 5-year term, got appointed to be the administrator, the head of NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and have now been at Zoox for 3 years. And I think, like Chris, I want to echo, one, how great it is to be here to support PAVE, because if I don't say this up front, people will say, was that really Mark? But the number is 36,120 lives lost in 2019 on US roadways. That's about 100 a day. And we know 94% of those crashes are related to some human choice or error we made. We have not seen an opportunity like this to save those lives. And again, I'm so supportive of PAVE because the whole mission is about getting people educated so we can make sure we get optimal benefit, save as many lives as possible.
Well, with that, let's kick right in, and we're going to start with a series of questions around safety because that is such an important part, as you both pointed out, of what autonomous vehicles are here to do. And a number of these questions we kind of had to mash together a little bit because we've gotten variations of them from everything from the League of American Bicyclists to the U.S.-Israel Future Mobility Center and all points in between. But what a number of these questions cluster around is this question of understanding what safety means in the context of an autonomous vehicle. We always hear the word safety, but it's oftentimes hard to understand what is safety. So let's start with Chris. Sort of from a technical perspective, how is it that that an AV developer measures safety, understands the actual safety of the system that you're developing?
Well, I think honestly, if you don't mind, I'd say it starts well before that. Right? You need to, safety is not one of these things you kind of bolt on at the end. It's not one of these things where you have a team that is, building a technology and say, okay, now we need to make it safe. It starts with building a safety culture of the organization and having people, understand that the technology, one of the biggest impacts we can have with this technology is around safety and saving the 36,000 plus lives that were lost in, that will be lost in the future in this, on America's roads and around the world. So I think you have to embed that mindset in the organization early on. You have to put process in place where people feel free to speak up when they see something, that they say something about it, and we have a chance to remedy it. And then you have to be thoughtful about how we develop the technology. So at Aurora, we do a bunch of work in virtual development testing so that means we can advance without having to be on the road. But of course, we also have to be on the road. And so in embedding in the people that operate those vehicles, that sense that, yeah, it's safety first, that they take a pride and ownership of what we're doing as a company together and the work they're doing. And then as part of the engineering team, of course, we think about how do we build a technology that ultimately is sufficiently safe to be out on the road. And there's really kind of two fundamental parts to that. One is when something breaks, how does the system respond? Does it understand something broke? And does it mitigate the risk that's generated by that thing that's broken? And the kind of the technical word for that is functional safety. And then the other part is if the thing is operating the way it's supposed to, is it operating in a way that is safe in the world? And the technical term for that is, or one of the technical terms for that is safety of the intended function, or SOTIF. And so when we think about building a safe system, we think about that foundational part of functional safety, and then the convincing ourselves, convincing regulators, and ultimately convincing the public that when the thing's working the way it's supposed to, that it's actually safe out of it.
Yeah, and
so I'm going to add,
of course,
I think
please.
One of his first points that I think was really important, I'm a little bit different sort of approach here, is for 100 years we've had reactive safety in automotive industry. Wait till somebody gets hurt, there's been a crash, somebody's hurt, somebody's died, let's figure out, how do we fix it maybe for the next one. In aviation, you've got a proactive safety culture, and that's kind of where this industry needs to move, from reactive to proactive safety culture, which is what Chris was getting to, because the epitome of a proactive safety culture is preventing crashes from happening in the first place. And that's what this new technology offers more than anything before. And the other point I just want to make quickly is, everyone loves to ask how safe is safe enough. And it's really important to realize we've never answered that. If you ask that same question for the last 100 years of road safety, we don't really have a good answer. How safe is safe enough? 36,120 lives lost? I don't think so. And even at NHTSA, when you're going for a defect, you always say, well, does it pose an unreasonable risk to safety? That's not really well defined either. And the reason I bring this up is if we had 100 years of already defining how safe is safe enough, we could say, okay, how do we take that and define what the future should look like? That's never been done before. So part of the challenge of defining how safe is safe enough is, no, we don't have any place to start. We're actually kind of starting with this new technology to figure out what the future should look like.
And I think this is one of the parts that maybe gets a little bit lost, right? Is that we need to be careful and thoughtful about what the threshold is that we accept of risk with these, because we obviously want to drive that to zero over time. But it's very easy to overlook the fact that the status quo is broken, and that there's an incredible opportunity to move from the status quo towards zero, and that we should be saving those lives along the way, and not wait for the perfect at the expense of all those lives, those incremental lives that we lost, between now and the perfect.
Which a classic, this is an NTSB thing, classic safety, which is safety delayed is safety denied. So what Chris just said is, while the target may need to be zero, the longer we delay, the more lives will get lost as we're trying to get to perfection.
So along the lines of this question of reasonable safety, I think one of the things that people really seem to latch onto a lot, and we've seen this in our poll data and also just in the discourse, is the question of cybersecurity. There's a sense, I think, maybe related to giving up control of the vehicle that somehow makes an AV much more prone to being hacked. And this is a really deep fear that people connect with AVs. What would you say to people who are have that specific fear in mind? I will start with you, Chris.
Okay. So one, of course, cybersecurity matters, right? We live in an ever increasingly connected world. We need to pay attention to it. It is one of the risks we face. Even in my home right now, right? I have a bunch of connected devices. There's people that may find malicious intent or malicious value in doing something. I think the thing that is is overlooked sometimes is that our vehicles today are already very connected, and that there are already risks to those platforms. And so we need to be working to secure the vehicle. I don't know that AAV makes it particularly more risky because the vehicles already have an immense amount of electronics in them, and they're connected, and problems can happen. So we need to think about this holistically as an industry. The other thing we need to think about is, like, what's the economic value, right? Just to, as you think about the risk of this, most cybercrime is about making money. And so there isn't that much money to be made in kind of taking control of the vehicle on the road. And so while we need to be thoughtful about the long-term kind of kinetic risk, I guess, and the injury risk that's there, it's important, but it's not the most important risk that we have to be working against. Excuse me.
And Mark, do you have anything to add to that? Or?
Well, I was just going to add, I think, energy, infrastructure, financial institutions, these cyber threats already exist. And so I think, there's a whole bunch of expertise already available for us to learn from, to apply to this challenge as well.
That's a great point. So another issue that gets a lot of attention and people love to discuss outside of the AV industry, and I feel like inside the AV industry, maybe there's a slightly different approach to it, and that's this question of the trolley problem. And just to really simply, it just means, if an AV has a choice between two bad outcomes, which one does it choose? Mark, why don't we start with you on that one? I mean, is that something that in your experience is as important as the public sort of attention that's paid to it?
I was going to let Chris start with this one,
Okay.
but my one comment will be that being around a lot of brilliant engineers, it's really clear that if that's a prominent issue, you shouldn't be in this industry anyway. And I think it's a critical one to ask. But if you're in that situation that you're trying to work that out, then you got some major problems probably that you got in that situation in the first place. So at a technical level, Chris can talk about it. But again, I think to your point, you got to address it, but really good engineers should never put you into that situation.
Yeah, and I think about it as it's much more of a tool for having a conversation around our societal values, right? The trolley problem is not new. We didn't come up with it. Maybe it's almost certainly had been around in different forms for millennia, right? And it's really a question of how do we value life, and what's kind of our expectation on that. For those of you, the very simply, the trolley problem is you have two bad choices. Which one's worse, and how do you decide that? My perspective on it is much like Mark's. Part of the goal of building an automated driving system is for it to be an exceptionally good defensive driver, and so it should not be getting into a situation where you have to choose one or the other. And in reality, most people are never in this situation. The other reality is that for a person who finds themselves in this situation, you look at the fatality rate of driving is like 1.15 events per 100 million miles or something like that. So it's a large number of people die because we drive a lot of miles, but the failure rate is actually comparatively low. Of those 1.15 fatalities per 100 million miles, it's probably 2 orders of magnitude further down the rate maybe even 3, that you would actually get into one of these trolley problem situations. And so we need to put our focus on kind of where the core of the problem is, and deal with that, and then have some thought about it, engage with folks and kind of what we accept socially for that tiny sliver. But again, in the spirit of safety delayed is safety lost mentality, right? This is not the place where we, as practitioners in the industry, where we should be spending the majority of our time. There's so much more positive we can do for that. But as a society, it's a really interesting conversation to have, and highlighting what do we value, how do we That's what I value to life.
Yeah. So this sort of leads, right? We've just had two sort of issues that seem to be very prominent psychological issues for that fears that people have when they think about these things, that maybe aren't as relevant to the actual development work as people might think. I'm wondering, if we invert that, what are maybe some of the issues or challenges that you do deal with working with AV technology that maybe people aren't aware of, or that there needs to be more of that kind of social conversation around?
Mark, do you want to go first?
You know, I'm going to let you handle the technical piece of this, Chris, and I'm going to go to, one of the things I've observed is the actual deployment in cities is going to be more challenging than people realize. And again, I give so much credit to the brilliant engineers. They're all over the industry. It's not just Chris who's here, but frankly, so many great minds solving these really hard problems. And I sit in the room with you folks. It's like amazing what they can come up with. I think what's been fascinating is to see that the rubber meets the road in the city means understanding where do you pick up and drop off people. If it's ride sharing, if you're going to move to electric vehicles, can the grid support that? Where do you park vehicles and maintain them? As you know, if you have an autonomous vehicle, how do you make sure it gets good use as opposed to the only 4% that most current cars get used, right? I mean, it's the actual deployment in the city. First responder, cop pulls over a vehicle. Who do they talk to, and how do they get that insurance card and registration? It's just like, these are practical, real-world issues that when you're talking about scaling a service within a city to solve the problems that we're talking about, it's more challenging. And so I think there's the technical part, and then there's the real world of, like, you don't just drop these in the city and say, man, we solved all that stuff. It's more like, no, you got to figure these out. And I think those are also those problems are much more difficult than people have realized at all levels, not just from the technical side, but from the cities and states as well, to kind of figure out how do we get optimal benefit.
Chris?
Yeah, I think what makes it hard is the breadth, right? I think that unlike developing a web application or even a consumer electronics product, right? The scope that we have to tackle, everything from the optoelectronics of the sensors, the RF electronics for radar, the high-speed computing and networking that happens in the vehicle, through the software infrastructure that allows us to implement sufficiently real-time systems, the complexity of taking the signal coming back from the sensors, interpreting that, generating a model of the world, predicting how that model is going to evolve over the next few seconds, figuring out, based on how the world evolves, how do we pick a safe path through it, translating that into something the vehicle can understand on how to move through the world, and then adding on top of that this, the fact that we're driving a multi-ton thing through the world, and so we need to be doing that all at a very high level of reliability and robustness and safety, and then we get into the business model and how do these, how do you take that technological marvel when we accomplish it, marry that up with the various industries, whether it be the truck or car OEMs or the transportation and logistics companies, and then the interface beyond there, as Mark said, to our friends in local, state, and federal governments, and how does it fit within the right? You get to do a bit of everything, which is fun and fascinating, and one of the joys of working in this space. But you have to be good at all of it, right? It's kind of the classic: a chain is only as good as its weakest link kind of problem. We have a long chain, unfortunately.
So you've both, I think, maybe already potentially given some answers to this question, but we have a number of questions about sort of timeline. The question that I remember, it was the first time I ever asked an AV expert a question about AVs. It was this question: when are AVs going to be here? And the answer I got was interesting. It took me a long time before I understood it. But I'm just kind of curious, when you get asked that question, what is your answer? What do you say to that question? And Chris, we can start with you.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with that question is it's ill-posed, because AV means an awful lot of things, right? So for probably a decade now, at Heathrow Airport, you could get in a people mover right? It was an automated vehicle that would drive from one of the terminals to the parking lot. And it would do that between concrete barriers and fences. And so that's been here for a decade. And it's a simple automated vehicle, but it's absolutely an automated vehicle, and it's moved, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. If you went to Phoenix today, my old team at Google has got vehicles driving around with no driver in a fixed community, helping people get where they want to go. So there's a small number of those vehicles today. I think the question becomes, how do we then expand from these kind of initial forays into things that serve the public more broadly, and deal with more complicated traffic environments, deal with higher speeds, or deal with more complicated weather and whatnot. And so what we're going to see is over the next 10, 20, 50 years, this technology is going to move from these seeds and germinate into something that and is ubiquitous, and will yield all of the social benefits in terms of safety, improved access, lower cost, moving people through the world. We'll see that happen over the coming decades. I don't know, Mark, I feel like I've marched on for a while here. Sorry.
Yeah, but I think that's exactly the stage, which is it's not when, it's actually what, where, when. And that's what Chris is pointing out. The what is everything from package delivery, people owning a vehicle, people in a ride share. Are we talking about platooning trucks? It's just like, we've got seniors in retirement communities already have, there's, where is what, where are those things going to be happening? And the when then is really the last question, because I think when they ask when, their question really is, so when can I go outside my house or my business, bring the app out and get the ride I want, whether it's my car or another vehicle, And so I think that's the challenge. And part of what PAVE needs to do is get people educated. There's a lot of what's, there's a lot of where's, and the when is kind of tied to what your specific. So I think that's part of what Chris was doing, was kind of unraveling that question a little bit, because there's a lot more going on than people realize. But the scale of saying, is there any city where I could go out and get my app? That doesn't exist yet. So that, there's a big continuum out there.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to sort of to kind of keep pushing forward with this. I mean, we've seen perception sort of, go all over the place of AVs over time, and I think a lot of it comes from sort of the confusion that you're referring to, right? Thinking AVs are here means one thing, when in fact it means all these different things, and that's so hard to understand. And I'm curious, because clearly perceptions outside the business have not necessarily been very well moored to the facts, whereas you guys are working with the technology hands-on behind the curtain. I'm wondering if and this is a question we got from a number of people, have your views about AVs in any sense, whether it's related to timeline or what have you, has that changed over the last, say, 5 years? Or has that been relatively consistent?
Yeah, I think that much of my views have, if anything, been amplified, right? That if I look at the crisis we have been through with COVID and that pandemic, I think the opportunity that we could have seen had automated vehicles been available to help, augment our supply chains, if they had been in place to make it easier for people to get from one place to another without having to interact with one another, and thus be put at risk from transmission. I think that I think there's an incredible opportunity there. I think there is that one of the big challenges is really just people understanding, as we talked about, what this technology means, because there's been because it's been a very it's been a technology that's captured the public's imagination. There's been a fair bit of branding of things that aren't necessarily what I would consider a self-driving vehicle as self-driving, right? And some of these really incredibly useful, technologically brilliant driver assistance systems have kind of bridged and been branded with words that kind of generate some confusion around whether they're an assistant or whether they're actually driving for you. And I think that there's an immense opportunity, right? This is one of the reasons why we helped found PAVE, was to help put more knowledge out into the community about, okay, driver assistance is great and it's important and it will save lives and it will make driving incrementally easier for people, but it's different than automated vehicles or self-driving vehicles, and helping people understand that dual path technology.
Yeah, and I would just add, so as a former NASA scientist and friends that have literally walked on the moon, and as a country last week, right, we just saw Americans return to space flight, on our own. It's just amazing technical things that we accomplished. And I kind of go back to what I was referring to earlier, is that when we take all that technology and want optimal benefit from it, how do we see it actually used appropriately to its greatest benefit in the real world? And so I think, again, that's where regulations, grid, literally down to the curb, how do we address those things to make sure the full opportunity gets realized, as opposed to, oh, look at this great technology we have, now what? And so I'm from Silicon Valley, but I'm still naive, enough to think that technology is a tool we should use to our benefit. And I don't want folks just to plop it down and say, now what? We should be really kind of working through, well, how are we going to get the safety, mobility, sustainability benefits that we know are possible, but how do we get there? I think those are actually pretty hard problems.
Yeah. And for us, that was, our company's mission is to deliver the benefits of self-driving technology safely. And we thought hard about that, because I agree wholly with you, Mark, that it's not about making technology for technology's sake. It's how do we actually make it work in the world? How do we make it easier for someone to get it somewhere? How do we make it easier for a farmer to get their stuff to market? How do we make it easier for us to be able to get the goods we need and the food we need to survive? Right?
Mark, I wanted to ask you one question we got a couple of versions of, and it's something that gets floated out there a lot. And it's the question of, is the sort of delayed or slower timeline, or the perception of a slower timeline, is that related to regulatory challenges? Are regulators the ones who are holding up sort of the widespread deployment of autonomous vehicles? As former NHTSA administrator, I'm sure you're the perfect person to ask this, so I'm going to ask you.
And I'm watching Chris. Was that a smile or an outright laugh?
That was an outright laugh. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the easy answer is no, in the sense that you have to think federal, state, and local within cities. And I think part of the reason you see, so many folks currently retrofitting vehicles is because they are FMVSS compliant vehicles. And there really is nothing that stops you from putting the automation into vehicles like that. And I just want to get this out, which is my model since being administrator is, we need innovation, we need data-driven best practices, and then third, we'll eventually get the regulation we need that's going to create this structure for safety for the future. But I think each one of those is a step we need to move toward to eventually get the regulatory structure that absolutely is in our future, but it's not holding us up at this moment.
So as totally predictably, we're running out of time faster than we're running out of questions. But I wanted to ask you each really quickly, sort of your thoughts on how COVID-19, because we got a ton of questions about this. How is that affecting, and I think you can break this into sort of both how's it affecting the development of AVs right now on a day-to-day kind of basis, but then also sort of zooming out strategically, how does it change how you think about the technology? And Chris, you touched on that a little bit, but let's start with you.
Yeah, so obviously there's been some very concrete tactical challenges, right? So we, like everyone else, our team went from being dispersed across 4 offices across the country to being dispersed to 500 personal homes, right? And so just the challenges of working through that. I think as a company, we were very well positioned for that. We had a bunch of virtual tools that we were using. The fact that we were already distributed meant that we kind of knew how to do that work. And I couldn't be prouder of how the team has pulled together through it. We also, of course, took our cars off the roads. Again, we built a bunch of virtual element test tools that allowed us to make really good progress through this. And in fact, we kept on staff all of our vehicle operators. They're part of our company. They're our employees. We want them to be with us, and we're able to target them at extracting even more information from the data we've already gathered. And this was good for us as a company and good for them, and increase their skill level. And ultimately, that'll be a benefit for us as a community. I think in terms of the long arc of this, we had a board meeting in April, and our model, we went into that thinking, should we slow down investment? Should we kind of keep on track, or should we, accelerate? And we don't believe that the thesis for why Aurora and broadly why automated vehicles matter changes because of this, right? There's, if anything, as I mentioned earlier, I think there's increased visibility into the benefit and demand that could be generated as, should there be other events like this. But, fundamentally making our roads safer, making it easier, more accessible to get around, making it less expensive, right? Those are goods, those are benefits that transcend this. And so, our decision was keep charging. And, as an independent company, we have the flexibility to, to focus on what we do, which is building the driver and keep moving forward. So it seems weird to say that something that has so monumentally affected the company doesn't really change our belief and our focus on what we're doing, but that's kind of how it ended out for us.
Do I get to just the one line, which is, if we had fully self-driving cars right now, delivery, have we gained appreciation for how critical an infrastructure element that is? And the second is, just think about a symptomatic individual who now has a self-driving car that can help get them to a healthcare facility without exposing any other human along the way, right? And then you clean that, et cetera. It's just like, if they were available today, we'd be seeing the benefits firsthand.
Yeah. And I know we're already over, but we just have a couple of quick lightning round questions that are designed for quick, easy answers. So I'll go Chris first and then Mark. Do we need artificial general intelligence in order to develop AVs? Chris?
No.
Mark? What he said.
Okay. I have the feeling you might agree on some of these. Are V2X connected car technologies necessary to develop and deploy autonomous vehicles? Chris?
No, but should it get widely adopted, we can see it being an additional sensor we could augment what's on the vehicle.
And I'll just add, what that does is expand the safety envelope that's going to be available.
We also have a question about, can AVs know about the fitness of the driver to take over beyond eyes, looking at the road or hands on the wheel? Are there other forms of driver monitoring you might be able to put in an autonomous vehicle?
Mark should answer this.
And as truly an actual expert in sleep and human fatigue, we've been trying to solve that forever, not just in driving, but in everything, operating rooms, airplanes, et cetera. It's a really hard problem. And I'll just tell you, after a couple decades, I think monitoring the vehicle and what we can learn using AI and other things may actually get us there sooner than monitoring the human, because you can be fully asleep with your eyes open.
And lastly, if you could dispel one AV myth in the general public perception, what would it be? Chris Urmson. Or is the problem that there isn't just one?
Mark, you got to go first, and then I'll come back to it. Let me give you a moment.
Okay. So I think we're in a moonshot moment, that we have a chance to really transform our society in safety, mobility, sustainability. But the myth we have to dispel is that self-driving cars and new technology are a magic bullet. They are not a panacea. As much as we could say if they were here today, what a difference they could make, let's not think for a moment that we're going to get to 0 fatalities in the next week, or that we're going to solve all of our social problems, etc. So I think they're a great tool with incredible benefits, but let's not think that they're a magic bullet that they're going to appear and all of a sudden everything gets solved.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I think it's this kind of, I'm gonna kind of answer twice. There's a set of people who believe automated vehicles are here and they could buy one today. And there's a set of people who believe that automated vehicles will never occur. And both of them are wrong. Right? And so this is a really complicated technology. It's hard to build this. It's hard to figure out the product. And unlike some other technologies where it kind of happens in a lab, out of sight, we're actually, as a nation, as a community, as a world, seeing this technology go through its development process, because a lot of the development happens on the public road. And so, it's actually kind of fun, I guess, to see kind of how the sausage is made in any of these complicated technology developments, right? You never get really to look inside Boeing developing the next airline, the conversations and design that happen, and the struggles of bringing iPhone to market, where, we get to, as the public, get to see a kind of front row view of that. And I guess that's fun for those on the outside, and, we're under the microscope as those on the inside.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We have gone a little bit over, but I think it was completely worth it. I want to thank Chris Urmson from Aurora, Mark Rosekind from Zoox. Thank you so much for your time, for your credibility, your insight, your wisdom. This has been incredible. And, this is it's a hard technology to develop. It's also a very hard technology to educate people about, as you know, and we couldn't do it without the help of our partners like you. So thank you so much, not just for being here, but for everything you've done to help support PAVE.
Thanks so much, Ed, and thanks for everyone who tuned in to listen to us today. Hopefully we're helpful, and really appreciate it. And thanks, Mark. It was fun as always.
Chris, it is always great. And Ed, PAVE, it's going to be critical for us to really be able to achieve these benefits. So count on us participating wherever we can help.
For sure.
Thank you so much. And thank you, of course, to our audience for taking the time to tune in. Thank you for all the questions that everyone sent in. You guys were all crucial in helping make this such a fascinating and informative session. Thank you all. We have another panel coming up again next week. Invites will go out for that tomorrow, and hopefully we'll see you there.